Hello, art history. Today we're going to do the next section in our study of early Europe. And today's section is on the Gothic period. And so before I get started, what I want to do is I want to lay down some basic facts that separate Romanesque, which we just did, from Gothic. And so when we talked about it, we talked about the fact that Romanesque has a lot to do with things that are round, very curvy, rounded arches based on the ancient Romans. So rounded arches, we see in Romanesque the beginning use of lots of stone in cathedrals and things like that. We see that the roof and the weight of the walls, they hadn't figured out how to build high yet. So Romanesque cathedrals have a tendency to be very dark. They had lots of relics, saint relics. And then we move into the Gothic period where there begins to be a bit of more prosperity in Europe. Yes, the plague is coming and the 100 Years' War is coming, but there's still a good deal of prosperity, a good deal of improvement in construction. Lots of ability to hire laborers to do the work, much more reading and writing it becomes available. And what we end up with is in the Gothic period, things are taller, they're higher, they're pointier. I try to always get my students to remember that Romanesque is round and Gothic is pointy. And, that's what we sort of need to think about. Gothic is, we have really tall vaults, we have really tall ceilings, we have really beautiful pointed arches. We have what becomes called the flying buttress, and we'll talk about that. We have rose windows, we have stained glass. There's a much larger dependency on music and singing. So we have construction of areas of the church for choirs. It really does become a really different type of construction. So that's what I want to talk about really quickly. Now, I just recorded this video before, and it didn't record. So I'm just peeking right up here and I see that it is recording. So before I get going and do this whole video again, I just wanted to make sure the record button was on. So let's talk about the Gothic period. So our first one is the cathedral at Chartres. And I want to start you off with looking at the side view. Okay. And you're going to see some things that are very, very clearly Gothic. You have these little things that come down here. You can see them here. Those are called flying buttresses. Those are structural things that help to distribute the weight. During the Gothic period, they figure out how to build tall, but they also figure out how to build tall without it collapsing. What's going to happen here with this big giant building is the weight of this wants to just push down, and it wants to collapse in and push the walls out flat like a pancake. So what these flying buttresses do, you can see it connects, this one connects right here. And then this one comes down, and it comes down like a little, a little L-shaped thing, and it attaches to this one that comes down and out farther. So this connects to the building here, it connects to the building here, and then the weight comes down here and down here and down into the ground. So what these flying buttresses do, a buttress is something that holds things up, and a flying buttress is one that holds things up, and it's tall, and it helps to just take that weight off of the roof. Excuse me, I have allergies. I just took an allergy pill. Sorry. Drink a little tea and continue. So what a flying buttress is, it's tall and it pushes back at that. The roof is trying to push down. And so the flying buttresses are pushing in to keep everything from collapsing. So that's one of the first things you see when you see Gothic. Another thing you see when you see Gothic is this little round window, which is called a rose window. That's a very Gothic element of construction, because once we begin being able to build up, unlike Romanesque churches, which were very dark because they couldn't figure out how to cut openings for windows without sacrificing the the structural integrity of the building. Once they figure out how to do these flying buttresses, then they can cut openings for windows, and we get a lot more light. We get stained glass and stuff like that. So here's your flying buttress that's very Gothic. Here's your stained glass window that's very Gothic. Here are your little points here, these little spires, very Gothic. Look at how decorated that one is. That is also incredibly Gothic. So when we're looking at Gothic, we're looking at things that are pointy. Okay. I want to bring you through some more of this page. So Chartres Cathedral in Chartres, France. It's Gothic Europe. And then I want you to look at this. The original construction of the church was between 1145 and 1155. And that is not this piece that you see here. Because in 1194, there was a catastrophic fire that burned down the majority of what was the existing Chartres Cathedral. And pretty much the only thing that was left was the front entrance. And we'll talk about why those two things look different. So the front entrance was left. And in 1195, they did the reconstruction of it says reconstruction, but it's actually like fully, completely new construction, because the church that was here was much smaller. It was Romanesque. It was very dark. And when it caught fire and burned to the ground in 1194, the construction of the new church went wild in the new Gothic period. And so the church that you see in front of you in this picture is Gothic from 1194 to 1220. So you have 6 images. You have this side elevation, okay? I'm going to bring you inside. This is the front. This is the original Romanesque front, okay, that survived the fire. And so we're going to talk about this in a little bit of detail. Here's that rose window. Now you're going to look and you're going to see here's a rose window that only has 3 things under it. So this is the original Romanesque entrance. The window was added later. Okay, so this is the rose window that was added after the fire. This is the rose window from the north entrance. And how can you tell the difference? Because there's 3 little windows under here. Look how round they are, just so rounded. But under this one, there are 5, and look how pointy they are. Okay, so this is the north entrance. We'll talk about that in a minute. This is your next image, which is the front entrance. It's this entrance right here, down here at the bottom. Okay, so first image, the building from the distance. And here we can see that rose window and the 5 pointed windows. Okay. Second image, the front. Okay. Third image, just the front doors. Fourth image is the interior. Okay. So this is standing at the narthex, the door where you enter, and looking down to the altar. And this area is the nave. And here you see these beautiful vaults and the stained glass and the arches that are pointy. And here you see all these pointy vaults. But this is the interior picture. Next picture is this window. And your final image is the floor plan. Okay. This is also standing back here at the nave, at the narthex, looking into the church. It's just really quite beautiful. All right. So we're going to come back here and we're going to start on the very first page, and we're going to have sort of a little bit of story time about Chartres Cathedral. All right. So let's talk about this. What happens is we end up with a lot of what I would call Catholic lore, Catholic stories about what happened here and what the story is about what's going on. So let's talk about it a little bit. In the 3rd century, so in the 200s, while Christianity is still fully illegal in Rome, little areas here in France are starting to become Christian. There was a very small Christian church, Catholic church, here on this site. Then in the 800s, the city of Chartres comes into the possession of a holy relic. And we talked about holy relics, what they are: bones of a saint, possessions of a saint, stuff like that. So in the 800s, the city of Chartres comes into the possession of what they call the Nativity Veil of the Virgin, or the Virgin Mary's veil, or the veil of the Nativity. What does that mean? So when you picture this Christian image of Mary and Joseph in the manger with the baby Jesus. She's typically depicted with a blue sort of veil on, not like a wedding veil that covers your face, but just that covers the top of your head. And in the 800s, Chartres comes into possession of a veil that is considered by the Catholic Church to be a holy relic, and it is considered to be the veil that the Virgin Mary was wearing at the Nativity, when she gave birth to Christ and when she was visited by the three wise men. So this is a holy relic. This is really important. So they come into the possession of this in the 800s. And Chartres becomes then a pilgrimage site. What do I mean by pilgrimage? Pilgrimage is when you take a voyage in order to pay respect to some part of your religion, okay? So, or your belief. So people begin to visit Chartres because it is a very important pilgrimage site, because they possess the veil of the Virgin Mary. Remember that at this time period, the 800s, the 900s, religion is pretty much all, like the most important thing in the lives of most people in Europe at that time. And so it becomes a pilgrimage site. There is a large church there that's built around the year 1000. And then in 1145, because there are so many people coming, so many pilgrims coming, an even larger church is built in the Romanesque style. And it takes place the construction takes place over about 10 years, and is mostly finished by 1155, then with some little additions here and there, like upgrades. Then in 1194, there is a catastrophic failure because of fire. Almost the whole thing burns down to the ground. Now, remember that these are a people that religion is the most important thing in their life. Remember, these are a people who don't have, scientific understanding and things like that. And so when this church burns to the ground, a couple of odd things happen. One, the whole back end of the church completely collapses and burns to the ground, but not the front entrance. And that was odd to them. Scientifically, what we know is the front entrance is, because of the two spires that were there, it's just a stronger built thing. There was also a couple of panels of stained glass that survived the fire. Now, we don't know exactly why that stained glass didn't break, but it didn't. And the same sort of thing happened in Paris recently when Notre Dame Cathedral burned. With the heat of the fire, most people thought that the rose window at Notre Dame should have shattered. It didn't. We're not exactly sure why it didn't, but it didn't. And we're happy about it. But when these pieces of stained glass didn't shatter in the fire of 1194, that seemed miraculous to the people of Chartres. The most miraculous thing to them, the way that they perceived what took place, is that in the underground chapel where the veil of the Virgin Mary was located, a good portion of the underground chapel was destroyed, but the particular area where the veil of the Virgin Mary was untouched by fire. So when the people of Chartres saw that the veil of the Virgin was untouched by fire, and saw that the stained glass window that survived the fire was this piece of Mary and the baby Jesus, the people of Chartres decided that there had been a miracle. And it was God's way of telling them that they needed to build a bigger church to the glory of God for more pilgrims to come and see the veil of the Virgin, the piece of the church that survived, and the stained glass window of the Virgin that survived the fire. It was seen as a sign from God that they needed to build a bigger, better, more important church. And so, because of that, in 1194, we begin construction of what you see in front of you, which is the Gothic era church. This church was created in only 26 years. That is unbelievable for a Gothic church. So it should remind you a little bit of the construction of like the Acropolis. It was just a huge building campaign. So we have a newer, bigger, better, taller, higher, lighter, prettier church that is built here. They do incorporate some of the pieces of the original Romanesque church, which is why you get that front. But in the 50 years, it's only 50 years, but in the 50 years of construction, the 50 years that passed between 1145, when the Romanesque church was built, and 1194, when the Gothic part, the ability to build changes dramatically. And so where Romanesque churches were sort of short and dark, in that 50 years, they learned how to build tall, and Gothic cathedrals become tall and light. Prior to the burning of Notre Dame de Paris, Notre Dame was probably considered the best example of Gothic architecture in France. Now that so much of that has been damaged, Chartres really does become now, for us, the best example of Gothic architecture that we have in France. So this new construction allowed for new height. It allowed for more glass. It allowed for more light. It allowed them to figure out how, instead of doing just a rounded arch, they figured out how to still distribute the weight in a pointed arch, which just gives it, again, that sense of height. It points up. And light is really, really important. So I'm going to scroll forward a little bit, and I'm going to talk about light when I talk about the inside of the church. So when you're looking at the inside of the church, you can see that there's a layer of stained glass here, there's a row of stained glass here, there's another whole row of stained glass here, and the whole back is covered in stained glass. And the reason that they can do that is they have this thing called a rib vault. The weight starts here at the circle, comes down through these four arms that are kind of like ribs attaching like in your own personal body. And then the weight comes down here off of this rib, and I'm going to pick up over here. So it comes down these two things, and here we have it. It comes to here, it comes down here, and then it distributes down this thing that's called a pier. The weight comes down here and is distributed across this line, taken up by this arch right here, and also taken up by the flying buttress that is outside. But now we're able to build all of these windows. And light is important. Remember that in Christianity, light is a big deal. Why is light a big deal? Christianity, and even in Judaism, the idea of colored light has a lot to do with the idea of excuse me one second. Someone is trying to log into my Zoom, which I thought I had closed. So I'm just going to turn that off. Sorry about that. I thought I had closed Zoom. So let's come back to this. All right. So light is a big deal. Why is light a big deal? Well, light is a big deal because we're dealing with the concept that that God created light out of the darkness, right? So there's that. There is, it is symbolic. Light is symbolic of the moment of creation. We talk about the divine light, the light of God, the light of Christ, the light of knowledge. We see light as being part of sort of the divine realm. Again, God made light out of darkness is one of the pieces in the book of Genesis. So light is a big deal. So we have this light, we have this tall, like it brings your eye up because of all these lines, your eye comes up like you're looking up to the heavens. And church like this, a cathedral like this with the tall ceilings and all of the light is a way, kind of like our Rotgen Pietà, a way of having an emotional and a physical response to your religion or to your faith. And so that is why these tall windows and all of this huge tall ceilings and this idea that you seem very small when you're in this building is really important. So when we're looking at the light, it's really, we remind ourselves of the fact also that most average people of this time period could not read. And didn't own books. They were too expensive. The royalty, monarchy and stuff like that, they could read, they had books, but the average person could not. And so the church becomes a way for them to, air quotes, read the stories of the Bible because the stained glass would have Bible stories depicted in them. And so that allowed for the Catholics at the time to come into the church. And even if they couldn't understand the Mass, which a lot of times was in Latin, and they didn't speak Latin, they could understand the stories by looking at the glass. Okay, so I'm going to come back this way. All right. And I'm just going to start working my way through the PowerPoint now. All right. So when we're looking at it, it's just long, 430 feet. It's a very long church. It's very wide. It's wide at it's 100 feet wide down the center, down that nave where people stand. And then it's 150 feet wide at that crossing area. Okay. So, we're looking at, it's tall. I mean, look at how tall, 120 feet. It's just a giant space. So it's a religious site. You can talk about the fact that it has relics. You can talk about the importance of light. And so we're going to look now at the front. Okay, so this is the front entrance. This is called the west facade, or the great portal on the west facade. Let me take you to the floor plan really quick so you can understand what I'm saying. So here is the entrance, the original entrance, the western facade entrance. Okay, this was not where the average person would enter when it was first built. And once the cross was added, people would come in really through these north and south entrances. Okay, so this is called the north transept. This is called the south transept. All right, but what we're going to talk about is the western facade, which is the original entrance. This part right here. Okay, that's what we're going to look at right now. Let me go back to the front. Sorry. All right, so we're looking at this and we see how round all of this is. We have our little round areas. We talked about this round area early on. It's called the tympanum, that little half circle above the doors. We see this round, how rounded this stuff is. We see this, and then we see all these pointy parts. And that is because this spire is the part of the pre-fire part, okay, from the 1145 to 1155. This one is added much later. Okay, and we can see the difference between the plain Romanesque and the really wild Gothic. We also know that this window was added later. So when we're looking at the front door, this royal portal, I'm going to come in a little bit more and zoom in. This is the royal portal. So I left this person here in this picture so that you can see, like, this is like door height, like 8 feet, right? Right here. Okay. But the door comes up much higher. And then there's the decorations at the top. So this was called the royal portal. It was used by royalty at the time when it was first constructed. The average person would not have gone through this door. And the bottom is decorated with figures, these figures here with Old Testament figures. And the top is decorated with images of the life of Christ. Okay, and so like we talked about at Sainte-Foy, the rich people would walk through these doors and be reminded of the kings and queens of the Old Testament, and be reminded to be, good servants of their people. Even though they were the royalty, they needed to treat their people well. And so let's look at what happens up here on the top. Okay. So I'm going to come into an illustrated version of it. So when you look at this tympanum, one is called a tympanum, 3 are called tympana. When you look at it, the biggest one is the one in the center. And this is the one that is Christ in majesty. So this is just Christ as like the king of the church, the most important. Okay, so that's what we see. When we look over to this side, okay, we see this one is the infancy of Christ. This is the Virgin Mary and the baby Jesus. Important event, the birth of Christ. We come over to this one. So we come in through remembering the early part of the church when Christ is born. We come out through the second coming of Christ. Okay, this is the first coming of Christ when he is born as a human. This is the second coming of Christ where he will stand in judgment over everyone and decide who goes to heaven and who doesn't go to heaven. So this is a judgment piece, kind of like the last judgment of Hugh Nefer, kind of like the one we saw in Sainte-Foy. This is Christ in judgment, okay? Then when we look at these little pieces, so we see the frieze here, A, B, and C, all of this is really about Christ, but then we have A, B, and C are about the life of the Virgin Mary and we think to ourselves, well, why are there's all of this decoration about the life of the Virgin Mary? And we have to remind ourselves that this church was built as a pilgrimage site because they had the veil of the Virgin Mary. So that's why we get these three pieces here of the life of Mary. Then these are the passion of Christ, when Christ is crucified and all of that. But then these big ones here, these are all Old Testament figures. These are all saints and things like that from the Old Testament. And again, it's used there to inspire. So let's come back here. Here's Christ in majesty. You can see him. Here's Mary and the infant Jesus. And here's Christ in judgment, passing judgment over people. So when we scroll up and we look at this, here we see Christ and his disciples and the saints of the church. We see that on the door frame right here, where these images of the Old Testament are called, we see what are called jamb figures, J-A-M-B, a door jamb. That's this part that holds up the top of the door, okay? And so when we look at our jamb figures, I'm gonna go here, we can see that there are jamb figures here on the west portal. And they're on either side of they're on either side of the door. See, here they are. Here's where they are, right here they are. Here's our jamb figures on the west portal. What I want to show you really, though, is look at the jamb figures on the west portal. They're sort of soft. Their edges are sort of round. They're not very detailed. They're okay. Then when the Gothic, and see it says R there for Romanesque. Then when the Gothic piece is constructed, look at this, right? Then look at the change. Again, this is only 50 years. But the difference between Romanesque construction and Gothic construction is a big deal. Look at how much crisper the images are. Look at their feet. Their feet are defined and pointy. Look at their hands. Their hands are much more clear. Their faces are clearer. This just sort of seems like it's fuzzy, right? This is crisp. This is everything. All the edges just seem to be soft and round. This is everything is very clear and crisp. And so that's the difference between our door jamb figures of the Romanesque and our door jamb figures of the Gothic period. There's just simply more detail. And they're quite lovely. When we look at Christ in majesty here, what we see is we see that he is surrounded by the four saints. And we talked about this when we did the Lindisfarne Gospel, is that often the saints are the four gospelists, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, who wrote the four gospels of the New Testament, the story of Christ. The gospelists are often depicted certain ways. Matthew is always depicted as an angel. Mark is depicted as the lion. Luke is depicted as the goat. We saw that when we did the Lindisfarne Gospel. And John is depicted as the eagle or the bird. Okay. And so here we see that iconography becoming clear to us. So there's Christ in majesty with his four gospelists, his disciples, and the saints of the church. All right, I'm going to go back this way to the next. We talked about the inside. This is your next image. Okay, so your next image is a stained glass window that was built in 1170. So construction on the main part of the church is 1145 to 1155. Some stained glass was added during a sort of like a refreshing of the church in 1170. And what you see here is the center section here is an original piece, okay, from the church that did not was not destroyed during the fire. I don't know why this looks like this. When I transferred stuff from the school computer to my home computer, some of it didn't format correctly. I'm sorry. Notre Dame, Our Lady, that's what Notre Dame means. So Notre Dame in Paris is Our Lady, and that its actual name is Notre Dame de Paris, Our Lady of Paris. This one in Chartres is Notre Dame de la Belvière, Our Lady of the Beautiful Window. Okay. And what we see here, anytime we see Mary with a crown on, what she is depicted as this is called Mary, Queen of Heaven. So we see this beautiful stained glass window of Mary Why does she look like she has a beard? Because it's old and the glass is becoming discolored. But we see Mary, we see baby man Jesus, like we talked about when we did the Virgin Theotokos, about just how the idea of seeing Jesus as having ever been an infant and been dependent on anyone is very hard for them. So they depicted him as sort of like just a fully grown, but just small. So here we see Mary and the baby Jesus, Mary, Queen of Heaven, and the baby Jesus. And in 1194, this stained glass window was not destroyed in the fire. And so when they added a bunch of stained glass windows to the new construction in 1194, they took this original panel that had Mary in it, and they added this surround to it. Okay, so now she is surrounded by these beautiful angels and all this beautiful color. And you can see the difference. Look at the detail in her face, and then look at the detail in the faces of the angels. Look at how just in 25 years, look at the difference between the stained glass that was constructed in 1170 and the stained glass that was created to surround it in 1194. I mean, it's just what was able to be accomplished and what was learned about glass and construction changes significantly. These are much larger pieces. They learned how to do much, much smaller pieces and leading. We have very deep colors. We have very deep blues and rich reds, and we even have a little bit of purples down here in some of these. So we're really able to see how they incorporated what they saw as these miraculous pieces into what becomes the new construction. Okay. So we'll go here to this final image here. This is the one the College Board would give you with all of these like white, black and white lines. They wouldn't even give you these little dots. They would just give you the thing. I would like to give you this one because you need to know some of this vocabulary, and it's really important. Narthex is where you enter the church. That's like the entrance, like your vestibule, your foyer, whatever you want to call it. Then we move into this red part, which is the nave. That's where you sit. Okay, that's called the nave. Where this, and you can even see, look at the Byzantine structure there. There's that old, not Byzantine, basilica structure there, the old Roman basilica structure. We can even still see it. But what we add is what this cross piece is called a transept, and it turns our basilica structure, which is just sort of like a long oval, it turns our basilica structure into a cross. And now from about 1200 up through even today, a large, like most Catholic churches were built in this cross structure. In the 50s, 60s, 70s, we begin to build round churches and things like that. But for the most part, Catholic churches are built still with this cross structure. Okay, so what do we call this? So this piece that comes across here is called the transept. It transects the basilica. And so they give you the north and the south one. The place where they meet, where the nave and the transept meet, is called the crossing. Okay, easy. Here, this little section right here, that's where we have the choir, because now we have these giant ceilings and the sound is amazing. And then back here, we have what are called radiating chapels or apsidal chapels. And they're just these little tiny chapels, because when you fill the whole church for Sunday Mass, you do them here. But if I just wanted to come and pray by myself, or I wanted to do just a small, in the middle of the day prayer, the priest could do it in one of these little tiny chapels. You wouldn't have to do this whole churchy thing. Okay, so that's what you have here. Now, what I love about this one and why I give you this one is because what you see here is Notre Dame de Belvedere. When they did it, this is one of the main entrances, and they put her right here. Okay, right here near the choir, near the altar, near where all of the important stuff happens. Okay, so that is Chartres. This is coming in the entrance and looking down the nave and across where the choir would be and all the way to the altar. This is what is called a labyrinth. And pilgrims who would come to see the veil of the Virgin and the window of the Virgin would come in and literally enter this labyrinth, and on their knees while praying, they would follow the path of this labyrinth that brings them in here. And they would eventually end in the center where they would say some prayers, and then they would go look. It was a very complex sort of thing that would have been done. Okay, so that is Chartres. That moves us to our second Gothic piece called the Bible Moralicis, the moralized Bible, or the Bible of morals. Okay, and so what you're looking at is a Bible that was ordered by, her name is Queen Blanche, Blanche. This is her son, King Louis IX. She had been the queen. Her husband had been the king. When her husband died, her son becomes king, and she orders this Bible for him. But unlike a regular Bible that just would tell the whole Old Testament, New Testament, and all the whole stories, she has this Bible ordered that just has the Bible of morals, okay? How to be a good person. And she orders this for him because she wants to make sure that when he becomes king, he's prepared to be king. And now that he is king, she wants to make sure that he has everything he needs to rule fairly and kindly and justly. And so what you see here is the dedication page. This is your first image, the dedication page. And here you see Queen Blanche and King Louis IX. And you see her gesturing to him, this is for you. You see him with his scepter and orb. Clearly he's king. She looks a little bit like Mary. He looks a little bit like the enthroned Christ. That's not an accident. It's that hint at divine right that we talk about. That we've been talking about since prehistory. We've been talking about divine right, the idea that people are chosen by the gods. And so here we see Blanche and her son, King Louis IX. And then we see two monks, the monks that are hired to do the writing and the drawing of this moralized Bible. Now, what's interesting is this Bible is for two purposes. The Bible is clearly to instruct Louis on how to be a good king, but it's also to show how rich and wealthy and amazing they are. And so when I tell you that this book is like crazy, super ridiculous important, I cannot overestimate how important. So we have ink and tempera paint with gold leaf on vellum. Vellum is calfskin, okay? So I'm gonna go to the next page, and this is where we're gonna talk about why this is such a big deal. All right, so this book is filled with these pages that have a Bible verse and an image to go with them. 8 little images, they're called medallions, 8 medallions on each page. And the medallions are an image that goes with the text. And so there are, over the course of about 600 pages, 4,887 illuminated scenes of how to be a good person. This is, without a doubt, the largest number of images that we have from this time period in a single place. The best quality of images that we have from this time period, and a really important catalog of beliefs and customs and clothing and things like that, because all of the people, while they are biblical characters, are depicted in what is for them modern dress. So all of these people are dressed the way that people would have dressed when this book was created in the early 1200s. And so we have these beautiful medallions that have all these bright colors and are meant to look like stained glass. We have these beautiful stories that were selected not by Blanche, but by the monks that she hired to make this book to teach Louis how to be a good ruler. And the events with these medallions and the text is in Latin. Louis the Ninth would have been able to read Latin. There's some French writing sprinkled in various little places where you can tell it's been a little bit annotated. But these are the kinds of decorations that we get. This is a scene of the apocalypse, the people being thrown into the stew of death in hell, and trying to prevent people from going to hell. It's a really big deal. Louis IX becomes a very religious man. He is apparently an excellent ruler to France. He is sainted by the Catholic Church, so he is actually known as Saint Louis IX. And he gives this book that was made for him by his mother. He gives this book to the King of Spain, Alfonso X the Wise, because they were both very religious. They were trying to be good, kind rulers. They were trying to push the faith of the Catholic Church. And so he gives this book to Alfonso X. And this book is currently housed at the cathedral in Toledo, Spain. There are actually a few pages were removed from it for reasons that we don't quite understand. And a couple of the pages are housed at the Morgan Library in New York City. So if you ever want to actually see that, you could go to New York City and you could see some of the pages of it. Otherwise, you will have to go to the cathedral in Toledo, Spain, to see it. But very cool, very, very important, very cool, very, very big deal. All right, moving on. All right, our last image in Gothic is sort of like art historians sort of talk about it as the word is precursor, the thing that comes before. This is sort of the end of Gothic, right before we enter the Renaissance. And this building is a big deal. So you have 3 images. For some reason, they give you the picture of the outside of it, I guess just so that you can identify it. So this is the outside of this building. And I'm going to talk about it in a little bit of detail in a second. Your next image is this interior image, okay? And your third image is this image, okay? So I'm going to come back to the beginning and we're going to talk about it. Actually, I'm going to stay here. So this is in a place called Padua, Italy. We do not have any idea who constructed or designed this church. The interior paintings, all of them were done by Giotto di Bondone, who is just simply known as Giotto. That is what he is known as. And he is your artist. We know that the chapel dates to about 1303, and we know that the frescoes, the painting inside, date to once the chapel was built and Giotto came in and painted them about 1305. So what are we talking about here? So let's look for a second at this building. Nope. Yeah. So we're going to look at this building. All right. So we have this building. And the name of this building is the Arena Chapel, or I'm going to go back to this one. The Arena Chapel or the Scrivani Chapel. Why is it called the Arena Chapel? Well, it's called the Arena Chapel because it was built right next to a Roman arena for sport. That Roman arena is not there anymore, but that's how it originally got its name. It is also called the Scrivani Chapel. And the reason that it's called the Scrivani Chapel is because it is a small private chapel that belonged to a very rich and important family, the Scrivani family, that lived here in Padua. And it's a big deal, okay? And the reason it's a big deal is Enrico Scrivani was a guy who was a banker, okay? And he was a moneylender. And what many people do not know is that for thousands of years, hundreds of years, it was illegal for Catholics, Christians, to lend money and charge interest. And if you lent money and charged interest, you were practicing usury, U-S-U-R-Y, and usury is a sin. And Enrico Scrivani was a moneylender who charged interest. And so you know how interest works. I lend you $10 and I say, fine, I'll lend you $10. When you pay it back, you have to give me $11. And that $1 is for me taking the risk of lending the money to you. That's interest. Enrico Scrivani was a banker, a moneylender, and he charged interest. And so that's really bad. And then there was this very famous writer, Dante, who wrote a book called The Divine Comedy. And one of the chapters of The Divine Comedy is the Inferno. And when Dante wrote the Inferno, he writes about Enrico Scrivani being in hell because he practiced usury and he was a bad guy. Well, when Enrico Scrivani read Dante's Inferno, and all of his friends read Dante's Inferno, and Dante's Inferno talked about him being in hell, Enrico Scrivani went, "Oh, I'm in a lot of trouble. I better do something about this." So he had this chapel built as a way to do, air quotes, good works. And then he hired Giotto to come in and paint all of these paintings, again, as a way of doing good works, as a way to basically earn his way or buy his way into heaven. He was hoping that by building this chapel and having all of the decorations to the glory of God painted, that it would get him out of going to hell. That's what he hoped. And so he hires Giotto, who was a very, very important painter of the time, to come in and, show this to paint this amazing group of images for the glory of God. Okay, so it's really important that you understand that the part of this that's important is not the building. The building is not really important. It's the stuff that goes on inside. So what we're going to do next is we're going to look at this guy, okay, and we're going to look at this guy. And I want you to look at the difference. This is a painting of Mary and the baby Jesus, done by an artist called Cimabue. Yes, that is really how you say his name, Cimabue. And then this is a painting of Mary and the baby Jesus by Giotto. Look at the difference. Our perspective is better here. Here we have just people floating. Here we have people that are actually correctly in perspective. People in the back are smaller and fuzzier. People in the front are larger. We have appropriate shading of Mary. We have better proportionality of a human figure. We see that she seems more, realistic. Okay, look at the perspective is so wrong here, and the perspective gets better here. And so what we're able to see is that Giotto is almost Renaissance. And what we'll see when we get to the Renaissance, what you'll understand a little better when we get to the Renaissance, is the idea that the Renaissance is really realistic. Okay, so let's talk about the inside. Okay. Okay, this is the inside. Okay. Some people get confused about what they're looking at. So in this picture, that is your picture from the College Board, I am standing at the altar looking at the door. That's the door, friends. Okay, that gives you an idea of how tall this is. That is the door. Human size is like to here. So as you come in, like even these ones that are down here at the bottom, they're taller than you. Look at how giant this is. Now, these pipes that you see up here at the top would not have been present at the time. The earth is a little bit unstable there, and those pipes were added for stability to keep it from collapsing. So this is me standing at the door looking at the altar. Look at how full of beautiful imagery it is. Look at all of the pictures that are here. And then look at the fact that the images are told here in 1, 2, 3, 4 registers. Okay? So the bottom registers were not painted by Giotto. They are not part of the original painting. And so you don't really need to know them. The upper, though, all of the upper stuff is really, really important, okay? So let's look at it. We have 3 registers, 1 at the top, 2 in the middle, 3 at the bottom. So when you're looking at this at the top, you kind of come down in a spiral. You start here, back by the door, you come around, and then when you get to the door, you come down to the second one, and you come around, and then when you get to the door, you come around, you go to the third one. All right. So what we're looking at it at the top, it's kind of like a comic strip. When you're looking at the top, the Saint Anne, who is the mother of Mary, the Virgin Mary, and then you have the birth of Mary. And this is where you get into a little bit of language that is important for Catholic story. The Immaculate Conception is that Mary was born without sin. So when Saint Anne has Mary, Mary is the only human other than Adam and Eve to be born without sin. They don't consider Jesus human. So in Catholic belief, you got Adam and Eve and then the Virgin Mary, born without sin. Okay, you have a little bit of the life of Mary, then you get into the birth of Christ, you get into like the early parts, the Magi, Christ at the temple, Christ's early teaching, then you get into the passion of Christ where Christ is, scourged the pillar and all those things. And then finally you get into Lamentation where Christ is born and where Christ is dead and died on the cross and they take him down. Okay. So when we're looking at this, we're looking at fresco. We talked about that in the ancient process where we do pigment on the wet panel. And we're looking at just an overwhelming number of illustrations. It's beautiful. It's overwhelming. It's stunning. This is Enrico trying to buy his way out of hell. He is trying real hard. Okay. So then we get into this. All right. We get into the Lamentation. And there are a lot of really cool things going on here. Okay. And cool things when I tell you that like really cool things. For the first time in hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years, the human figures that we see look realistic. Giotto was like revolutionary in bringing back the realism of human figures. So figures look realistic. Okay. We see some other things that are unusual. Christ, we see we see his profile, but we do see his body laid out. And you see, this is his mother, Mary, the Virgin Mary. This is Mary Magdalene, and this is probably Veronica. Okay. We see this is Saint John, his favorite of the disciples. Okay. We also see Peter in the background. All right. But what's important here is look at this figure here and this figure here. What do you notice about these two figures? I'm hoping you say they have their backs to us. Correct. This is unusual. This is very unusual to have images pictured where a person has their back to you. Why does these two people have their backs to us? Because it puts the viewer into this place. It puts us with these two people watching what's going on. It is an attempt to bring us into this thing that's going on. Okay. And so we are part of the composition. You're going to notice, though, that here the bottom half of the picture is very crowded. The upper half of the picture is pretty empty. All we see are angels up here. It's an interesting compositional idea. He leaves the background very simple, but he does do a few things. We have what is called an implied line. It brings our eye down this hill straight to Mary and Jesus. Okay, the hill leads us there. We have the tree. Christ is usually described as being from the tree of Jesse. A tree that has all of its leaves off is considered dead, but we remind ourselves that in the spring it will bloom again. And so it is the idea of like birth, life, death, and rebirth. Okay. We see that these are our human people down here, but we can tell who our saints are. And we see our angels up here. Okay. And we can tell that there is light coming in, and it appears to be coming in from above us. And we assume that is the light of God reflecting down on the situation. And at the top, we just have sky, and it's filled with angels. But when we step back and look at the face of the angel. They are distraught. Look at the face of Mary. She's not quite as distraught as the Rocan Pietà, but she's not quite as serene as Michelangelo's Pietà. She's sort of somewhere in the middle. Okay. And so we are left with this image of just angels flinging their arms back, pulling their hair out, weeping, crying, same as the people. Okay. And so this is the image that we have. And then next to it, we have this image that is part of this. You're meant to look at this and this together. And in this little, it's called a quatrefoil. In this little little area next to it, we see the story of this man being swallowed by a whale. That is the story of Jonah. And it's the story of Jonah, who is swallowed by the whale. He stays in the whale's stomach for 3 days, and then he comes out of the whale's stomach and is delivered to Nineveh, where he begins to preach. And it's not an accident. Jonah in the body of the whale, or air quotes, dead for 3 days, and then he comes back to life and continues to preach the gospel. Same as we'll have Christ dead for 3 days, who will come back to life and preach the gospel. So Giotto sort of arranged both of these images together as a way to remind you of this idea of life, death, and rebirth. When we think about this, we think about the idea of crossing over from Gothic to Renaissance. And this is really where we do that. We do that with the cathedral in Florence and the Duomo and domes and sorts of things like that. And this is not one of your images, but this is sort of like, as we see, we have a little bit of rounded, we have a little bit of pointed, but we'll get into Renaissance cathedrals, which will just be even more over the top and ridiculous. And this is sort of that. This is one of the first earliest Renaissance pieces. And so that is the end of Gothic. I hope that you enjoyed it, and I will see you next time when we begin the Renaissance. Bye, guys.